I appreciate the chance to be here and talk about these things. And everybody's attending us. I thought you did a great job last time, kind of spending some time talking around the tables. And so I think we're going to do more of that these next couple of sessions, just to give you guys a chance to share your experiences and share your stories as we go along. So appreciate you just being a part of that process. I don't know about you guys, but it's been a busy day for me, and transitioning from my day to here is sometimes a challenge. We all have those issues. So let's go to the Lord in prayer and ask for His guidance. Lord, I do pray for this group. Thank you for this opportunity to be here, Lord, and just that we would focus our heart and minds on you and on one another and what's going on here in the moment. Lord, we thank you for the fact that you do intervene in the lives, in all of our lives, that you are active, you're not passive, you're active in helping us sort out life and the ups and downs of life. We pray that your Spirit would just fill this place. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. So, we're going to go through some things again and just a quick review. I'm not going to take as much time because I think we've laid the groundwork that I was wanting to really lay here. So talking about the sacred breaking through the mundane and that process, and that that's the core of the shack. The shack is is a metaphor, is a way of looking at how God shows up in our lives, right in the middle of our trauma, right in the heart of our mundane, day-to-day, everyday life. We talked about the definition of mundane, in terms of the created world, in a sense. So every aspect of that and how God breaks through, how the sacred breaks through the mundane. We talked about how it's not just an event. I think a lot of times I see folks that are going through struggles. It happens to me every day. I dealt with it a time or two today, where people they're going through struggles, and they're wanting answers, and I don't follow them from wanting answers, but they want the easy answer. They want it to be I have this, this moment, this sacred moment, and then that fixes everything. And maybe that does happen sometimes, but that's not most of the time the way I experience it. That those moments of the sacred breaking through the mundane are the invitation. And it's an invitation to a relational process with God. It's a conversation with God that's ongoing. And those are some of the things that we have talked about. We also talked about the fact that conversation, when we were reviewing the idea of trusting and trust, I told some stories about some of my patients and folks that I've worked with and had the privilege of working with, and that a lot of them have lots of intellectual knowledge about God, but their operational theology is very different. The way they see themselves in the world, their operational theology is very different. And the one lady that really struggled with religion and all of that, but was beginning to grow in this experience, her sacred breaking through occurred in my office when she was beginning to experience a sense of trust as transcendent. That it wasn't just tied up in her emotions, and it wasn't just tied up in a person, but it was something transcendent. And then she began to experience hope in that same way. And she's the one that I shared with you that, one day she was sitting in my office, and if you try to talk to her about God and use any kind of religious language, it just goes, off in a tangent, and she's not, she can talk the language, but at a heart level, one day she was sitting in my office and talking about this trust that she was experiencing, this hope that she was experiencing as transcendent. And she was like, wow, maybe that's kind of like God. I'm like, yeah, it could be, And so those sacred moments and this relational conversation is deep within the heart, and it's the growing reality of these. Of experiencing the nature and character of God. We talked about that, talked about the mundane, breaking through. I gave you some of my developmental history. And then we talked about last time about the what are the rules, principles, paradigms, gods that get in the way of you seeing God as He truly is? And we've laid the groundwork for how that process unfolds. And it is a complex process. It's hard to break it down and make it simple. It's a complex process of looking at how those paradigms develop and how that stuff gets in the way. We talked about when we do not see God as He truly is, how can we ever hope to see ourselves as we truly are? That's a theme that I run across a lot. I had the privilege of sharing that with somebody today. I mean, she's really kind of she's had some struggles for the last probably 5 years or more. Just her life has just gotten completely knocked off the rails, and it's really shattered her view of herself in the world. And she's coming back on track. She's kind of getting back on track, and she's talking about these kinds of things today. She talked about the fact that she's starting to see God in completely different ways that she hadn't imagined before, and that's helping her to see herself more clearly, and she's regaining a sense of confidence and hope. Talk about embrace complexity. Like I was saying a minute ago, you can't, I can't, maybe somebody can, I can't, break it down. I mean, I understand a lot of the things, but you have to, in order to really do this kind of work and go on this kind of journey, you've got to be willing to embrace the complexity of it. And you guys have done a great job. I appreciate your participation in it. You got to be able to embrace relationship over rules. That's some of what we talked about last time. And I think the hard part, I was talking with some folks after our session last time, I think one of the hard parts too about the whole issue of embracing relationship over rules also means embracing the fact that you may not always get answers to some of your, that if we try to embrace the rules, we're trying to control things, and we want to have all the answers right, and that's kind of satisfying in some sense, but in the end it ends up hollow and sometimes destructive. And so being able to embrace relationship over rules and being right or having all of the answers is a part of this journey, I think, for folks. And we talk about, taking on the gods, as you sort all that out, sort out the paradigms and the perceptions and the emotions, and being willing to challenge your paradigms and your core beliefs in a journey along these lines. And again, I want to continue the discussion and allow you guys to move in a direction. And I realize that in a group this size, there's people at different stages in their journey, and so I'm not trying to make it all psychiatrists like myself or whatever, but I'm just trying to give you an idea about what a healing journey looks like. And I think the Shack provides such a great story for that. And so I hope it's helpful at times in your own healing journey, or I hope it's helpful as you maybe help others in their journey. I would say that it's also, I feel like that these principles, when we did our retreat, the Sacred Space Ministries did our retreat last October, we talked about this. I didn't have any big trauma that I felt like I was dealing with or anything, but I definitely felt God knocking at some doors in my heart that I'd closed off to Him, and I had, so I was leading the retreat, but I had to deal with the realities of some things that God had been saying for a while. Hey, Brad, we haven't been together in this place in a while, and we've been together in other places, but we haven't been together in this place in a while, and this is where I really want to meet you at, And I was a participant. I didn't mean to share this tonight, but I was a participant in Jo. She's not here tonight. She's become she's one of the leaders of Sacred Space Ministry. Jo was my leader. We were doing a rappelling exercise, and I was one of the leaders too, but I was participating. I was doing the rappelling. And so, she was standing up here, and I had my tail end hanging off of a, 60-foot cliff, and I was, God was like, yeah, Brad, right here. This is the place that I was needing to meet you at, because it became those moments of, because Joe was, again, I didn't mean to tell this, but there was a little lip, and I'd rappelled before, but this was not a straight rappel. It was a rappel, and then the cliff undercut. And I'd rappelled before, so I backed off, and I was kind of, and then the cliff undercut, and Joe kept saying, Brad, it's just a little step. Brad, it's just a little step. I said, woman, you lie to me. I do not see a little step. I have no idea what you're talking about. It does not look like a little step. But that became the moment, and then I processed it kind of in my quiet time and with the group the whole rest of the weekend, because that's been a big part of what God has been dealing with me for the past year or so about some things that I needed to just, I needed to take some steps, and God has been saying for a long time, Brad, it's just a couple little steps here. I don't see any little steps. So, the point is, the process that I've been talking about is a process that, at least for me, I go on frequently. I go through the steps of this process frequently and have to kind of open some of these doors in my heart from time to time to God when He's knocking on them and saying, hey, let's meet here. We haven't met here in a while. So hopefully that gives you more just thoughts about the process and how it applies to all of us, I think, at times, on the journey. So, with that in mind, I'm going to invite your participation again around the tables here and see how it goes. It's tough. I love doing this, and you guys are great participants last time, so just bear with me and, as we go along, because I want to give you guys time to share, and I don't want to drag, and so I'm just trying to sit up here and gauge where each of the groups are at as we move on. I've kind of grouped some of the questions into groups rather than going through them one at a time. I've grouped them into groups, so we'll review a few things, and then I'll give you guys some time to reflect on 3 or 4 of the questions and things that we're talking about, and then we'll go through that in sections and just see how our time transitions as we go along here. The theme for tonight, the thought is entering your shack. And the subtitle, I guess, would be the questions of God versus the questions for God. So, give yourself a chance to reflect on that. The questions of God versus the questions for God. That's some of what Mac is struggling with as he's entering into the shack. It's some of the things he's struggling with as he's dealing with the loss and trauma. And I feel like it's some of the things that I think we all deal with. And I think, there are other, years ago, one of the pivotal studies in my, faith development was Blackaby's Experiencing God. And, Blackaby talks about it as a crisis of belief, that we, as we're growing in our relationship with God and we're growing in deepening our experience with God, we will always come to moments of crisis of belief where we're like, well, I thought I knew God in this way, but maybe God is also, like this. And we have in that moment the question of God. Who is God? What is God? And then we move hopefully past that to embrace the relational context of questions for God and just conversation with God. And that's some of what we're going to see how Mac goes through that and let you guys reflect on that some tonight. So we're going to deal mostly in chapter 5 and in chapter 6. And we're going to deal with some hard questions. There's some hard questions in chapter 5. So we'll look at some of those hard questions. So the questions of God: facts, reason, and logic. Mac was like a lot of us. Paul, if you ever get to hear him speak, talks about that. He was, Mac. The story of Mac is fictional, and the things that happened to Mac are not exactly the things that happened to Paul. But Paul would also say that the story of Mac, the truth of the story of Mac, is the truth of what Paul went through, and he struggled with, these questions of God, and he had all of his facts and his reason and his logic lined up that he developed over the years in seminary training and all sorts of stuff, and all that just, didn't help. And when he hit his crisis and things, he realized that all that stuff didn't help. he was dealing with, is that all in there? Yeah. He was dealing with this question. I can read it from here better. So the pain had not been building, or the pain had been building in his stomach, finally pushed him into panic. After only 5 steps, he stopped and retched so strongly that it brought him to his knees. "Please help me," he groaned. He stood up on shaky legs and took another step away from the car. Then he stopped and turned back. He opened the passenger door and reached in, rummaging around until he felt the small tin box. He pried the lid off and found what he was looking for. His favorite picture of Missy, which he removed along with the note. Replacing the lid, he left the box on the seat. Reflect on reflections. Take time to find the objects that give you courage and strength for your journey. That's an important step, and I'm going to give you time to reflect on that here in a minute around the group. But I think that's an important step for everybody that I've ever worked with that have really been at the place. I mean, and that's one of the ways you can tell, you know. It's like a little telltale signs of doing this over time. Is whether or not people are really at the place that they're ready to kind of dive into a big journey, you know, a deep journey like this, or they're just kind of intellectually going through the motions. Because if they're really ready to dive into a deep journey like this, they're a little intimidated and scared, and they're looking around for things that make them feel safe. And so they're looking for their things that they can get a hold of that give them a little bit of courage and strength to take the journey, to take the step. I thought it was masterful that Paul included that, and he doesn't have any background and stuff like that. He just went through it all. So Mac the Courageous had been reduced to just another scared boy in the woods. Snapping the safety back on, he tucked the gun away. Someone could get hurt, he thought, with a sigh of relief. So we're going to reflect on, take time to step away from things that may give you a false sense of safety, but may actually be destructive. Alcohol, drugs, promiscuity, self-injury. Don't rely on those things anymore to go through the journey. You know, again, I'm not suggesting you guys are necessarily struggling with those things, but I just want you to reflect on the fact that that's another reality that I see all the time. Is people when people are really in a place of going into a deep kind of journey here, they look for things that help them feel safe, and some of those are good things. You want to help them find some of those things, but you also want to help them take a look at the things that they're grabbing for that are potentially destructive. Things that, you know, and we all have those times, you know, some of those at times. So, taking another deep breath and exhaling slowly, he calmed himself. Determined that he was done being afraid, he continued down the path, trying to look more confident than he felt. He hoped he hadn't come all this way for nothing. If God was really meeting him here, he was more than ready to get a few things off his chest, respectfully, of course. Reflect on finding courage to face God in our pain versus trying to hide our emotions and pain from God. So, that's a cluster of questions that I want you to take some time around the table to reflect on. And the idea there is looking at the things that that give you courage to take on hard things, to go, kind of deep inside or take on hard things. Look at the things that get in the way. And that number 14 is probably the core of that group of questions, is just reflecting on what gives you the courage to face God in our pain versus trying to hide our emotions and pain from God. A lot of people use just intellectualization. I mean, they may not be turning to alcohol and drugs, whatever, to run from God, but they just intellectualize. They just, I don't have any emotions, I don't really have any pain, and I just, they think through it intellectually. So, I'm going to give you just a few minutes, and we'll just kind of, again, just discuss around your table, and, if you run out of things to talk about the weather. That's been crazy, but hopefully you'll find other things to talk about. And then we'll move on here in a minute. Okay, keep talking again. Don't feel like you gotta stop. We've got a good conversation going. I want to give you another thing to reflect on here, though, with your group. Turn it off. Huh. Is there an off button? Or I can see the.
There's an on-off button.
Maybe
on the side.
on the side. No, it says it's still on.
Well, probably the battery died.
Okay. Battery or something there? It's a battery, okay. Battery's dead. Okay. Yeah, go ahead, the next one there, Tim, if you can move it while they're, one more. There we go. Okay, so the next one that I was going to give you a chance to reflect on says, a few turns later, he stumbled out of the woods and into a clearing. At the far side and down the slope, he saw it, the shack. So reflect on, I want to give you the chance to reflect on what the shack meant for Mac and what it represents for you. If you follow us on our Facebook page, we're still kind of getting all that together. Joe and Jeremy and I aren't real savvy on all that stuff, so we got a young lady. Oh, I apologize. I did not mean this to be anything about Cape. I'm not involved in any of that. My kids are all out of school. They went to Advance, so, I mean, that is Advance Colors, but they went to Advance, so I didn't know anything about, I wasn't even thinking about that at all, so I apologize. But we did have a young lady, we have a young lady from Jackson that's helping us out with the Facebook stuff and getting us up to speed on all that. But anyway, we have a blog post there. A young lady that went through the Shack Study Guide is doing the Shack Study Guide. I may have talked about her last week, but I don't think we had this blog post up last week. She is going through the study guide with Joe as a spiritual mentor, and then she was at our retreat, and she posted a blog, and we reposted it on our site called, I'm going back to Bangkok, back to Thailand. I'm going back to Thailand, she said. And she just did a great job of telling her story, kind of her answer to this question, reflecting on what the shack meant for Mac and what it meant for her. I'm not going to read the whole blog, but she details kind of her experience of growing in her faith and really focusing on going on missions, and thought that was kind of the calling in her life, and worked very hard for all this to happen. And she ends up on the mission field in Thailand, and within a day or two of getting there, she just gets deathly sick and really isn't able to complete any of the experience, and has continued to be very ill since then. And it shook her faith. She struggled with this significantly. And she said in the book, spoiler alert if you haven't read it, sorry, she says, the main character of the story is invited back to the deepest place of his hurt to find healing. There's so much more I wish I could share about it. He finds himself in the place where his daughter was murdered years later. In this place, he finds the real God, the God who pursued him gently for 14 years through his hurt and pain. I share this with you to share a dream I believe was from God, from the Lord, that I had a few nights ago. God called me back to Thailand. What? Are you kidding me? Are you serious? I literally remember feeling these things in my dreams. God, why would you ever want me to go back to that place? I was miserable. Sorry, I get emotional because this young girl I've not known her for a long time, but she's really means a lot to me, and I'm excited to see what God's doing in her life. I was miserable, hurting, broken. God, what? Then in my dream, crazy stuff, I remembered the Shack Study Guide. I knew I had to go back, so in my dream, I went. When I woke up, I was pretty distraught. I was still feeling the same way that I was in my dream. I was uneasy and restless, angry and hurt that the Lord would call me back to such a hard place and time for me. Then it hit me. God was calling me back to Thailand. God was inviting me back to Thailand. He was inviting me to take a journey back to the deepest places of hurt I was feeling. So now I'm choosing to accept his invitation. And she goes on and talks more about that process for her. But for her, that's her shack, going back to Thailand. So take a minute and just share what does that represent for you, or how, for me, again, it doesn't have to be something dramatic. For me, God's invitation recently to my shack was, hanging off that cliff going, Brad, take a look. There's a couple things here, a couple places in your heart you've been hiding from me and you haven't been really open to talking with me about, and we need to talk. So take a minute, share that, and just kind of go around, and then we'll move on. And I'll give you 3 minutes. I'll set a timer. So don't, if you've got good discussion going, let the discussion continue, or come back to it when I give you another break here to talk. But I want to let the discussion, keep moving here with a few thoughts. And I'm just taking some sections because I think I pulled a few that I thought really made some good points about the process of entering your shack, the beginning point of really walking into the shack. You've dealt with all the circumstances and different things, but now you're right there, you're walking into the shack. So Mac is walking into the shack there, and he's saying, I'm so sorry, honey. Tears began to well up in his eyes, and finally his heart exploded like a flash flood, releasing his pent-up anger and letting it rush down the rocky canyons of his emotions. Turning his eyes heavenward, he began screaming his anguished questions. Why? Why did you let this happen? Why did you bring me here? Of all the places to meet you, why here? Wasn't it enough to kill my baby? Do you have to toy with me too? In a blind rage, Mac grabbed the nearest chair and flung it at the window. It smashed into pieces. He picked up one of the legs and began destroying everything he could. Groans and moans of despair and fury burst through his lips as he beat his wrath into the terrible place. I hate you. In a frenzy, he pounded out his rage until he was exhausted and spent. So that question just invites people to reflect on what Mac was going through in his rage and letting rage or anger out at God, and just reflecting on, is that okay or not? There's lots and lots of different people with lots and lots of different beliefs about whether or not you should be angry at God, and how do you deal with emotions, and how does God react when we're angry? And all of those things are fair game for sorting out, all of this stuff as you're going through it, not just theologically, but at a heart level. As you move on in those questions, even in his exhaustion, the anger seethed, and he once again took his aim at the indifferent God he imagined somewhere beyond the roof of the shack. God, you couldn't even let us find her and bury her properly? Was that just too much to ask? Reflect on the indifferent God. So is it okay to be angry? As you're stepping into the shack, as you're dealing with hard stuff, or you're working with someone is it okay to be angry with God? Is it, if I vent this anger, what is God's reaction? Is God this indifferent God? Is he going to be angry at me? Those sort of things. As a mix of emotions ebbed and flowed, his anger giving way to pain, a fresh wave of sorrow began to mix with its confusion. So where are you? I thought you wanted to meet me here. Well, here I am, God. And you're nowhere to be found. You've never been around when I needed you. Not when I was a little boy, not when I lost Missy, not now. So Papa, some Papa you are. He spit out the words. Max sat there in silence. The emptiness of the place invaded his soul. He jumbled his jumble of unanswered questions and far-flung accusations settled to the floor with him, and then slowly drained into a pit of desolation. A great sadness tightened around him, and he almost welcomed its smothering sensation. This pain he knew. He was familiar with it, almost like a friend. Reflect on Mac's anger at God and the pit of desolation. Is there a link? we link them theologically, but I'm trying to challenge everybody to not think so theologically, just kind of feel your way through it from a heart level, because that's what people are struggling with. And I think that's the transition point a lot of times in my office when I see folks right at this point, when I see them there, I mean, and I see people all the time. I have one individual that I saw today, that she gets right to this point, and then she goes off, and we do a dance, and we circle around, and we deal with stuff, and then she comes back, and it's maybe 6 months later, and we're right at this point again, and I'm just like, okay, are we gonna get there now? And someday we will. Someday we will. We're not there yet, because she just goes right back into her great sadness and struggles with those things. Killing himself would be one way to strike back at God, if God even exists. I almost didn't put this question in here because that's a hard question, but it's one of the deals with the shack. It deals with some really raw, hard questions. And these are the questions that people struggle with at times, at certain points in life. So, killing himself would be one way to strike back at God, if God even existed. Clouds parted inside, and a sunbeam suddenly spilled into the room, piercing the center of his despair. But what about Nan? And what about Josh and Kate, Tyler, and John? As much as he longed to stop the ache in his heart, he knew he could not add to their hurt. Reflect on when you're ready to look around for sunbeams piercing the center of your despair. So the questions to just kind of go around the table, and these are kind of dark, some hard questions. They're not easy questions. Don't feel like you have to share deep personal stories. In some of these areas, if you don't feel comfortable, that's fine. But just think about it a little bit and think share what you feel comfortable sharing. But reflect on what Mac was going through, his anger at God. Is it okay to direct anger at God? Mac struggled with an indifferent God. He was raging. I think I've said this before. Paul talks about that scene when he wrote it because of his own experiences. He felt like when Mac first walked into the shack, he was raging against a God that didn't really exist, but it was the God of his own creation in his mind, that the indifferent God. Reflect on Mac's anger at God in the pit of desolation, and then when you get those little sunbeams that break through that center of despair. We're going to come back to that when I talk about it more here in a minute too, but go ahead and talk a little bit about that, and I'll give you about 5 minutes, and then we'll move on. One of the things that I want to keep talking again, but that one of the reasons I put that in there too, because one of the things that I found, and I just in years of doing this, and again, it's just one of the reasons that I really was drawn to the shack even long before I knew Paul, was that conversation, as painful as it is, and we don't even like to look at it, but that conversation is raw, and I think people find themselves at that point of hopelessness and despair, maybe not necessarily suicidal, but I think people find themselves at that point more than we want to admit. And one of the things that I have learned to do over the years is to give people permission to have that conversation with me and to talk openly about it and not to be shocked that they're there. Also, not to try to convince them that they shouldn't feel that way or don't think about that or don't, But what I have done, and that's why I like that part there, it just depicts it so beautifully, and it's something I've used for years, is I listen to their story, but I try to find the sunbeam, that Paul just wrote that so beautifully, that it was right in that moment, even before, so Mac was in the shack. I'm going to kind of move into the next section a little bit. Mac was in the shack questioning God. He was in his shack questioning God. He wasn't having a conversation with God at this point. There weren't questions for. He was in the shack questioning God, and God was silent because Mac was questioning. And again, I'm not saying that it's bad to question God or that you shouldn't be angry at God. I think it's actually really healthy. But it's not a matter that it's bad to do those things, but those things skew our ability to hear God, because God showed up, but it wasn't the God that Mac was looking for. God showed up in that little sunbeam, I think. God showed up in that version of the Mac, in a little sunbeam, right at the moment of Mac's despair, that kind of caused him to catch himself, to think about his wife and kids, and to there was just that little sunbeam. And that's what I often talk to people about. It's like, oh, where's that, I'll once people know, and we've been talking about some of this when they're talking, then I'll be like, oh, wait, I just saw that little sunbeam there. I mean, I hear the despair, and I want you to own it and embrace it. It's okay, but there's that sunbeam. What are we going to do with it? And you help them sort through that in that way. And then the scene transitions, and I'm going to skip through a couple of those. The scene transitions, and it moves now into this experience. I'm going to skip through a couple of these too. I mean, this is one of the pivotal moments, where now Mac is walking back into the shack, and he's angry, and he recognizes that the scene has changed, and he's about to bang on the door, and before he can even bang on the door, this big black woman comes out and gives him this big hug and is talking with him, and sorting through those things. I was going to read them, but I'm not going to take the time to read all of that. You've read it. You're getting a sense of that experience and what that was like for Mac, and how it throws him off. It throws him, he's off balance, not sure what to think. And so the questions, and I am going to give you a couple of minutes to reflect on, and then we'll transition on, is just now we're dealing with the conversation with God, not the question of God, but questions for God. Now Mac is actually kind of recognizes that he's face to face with God. Now, I don't know how that happens for people. I don't know how that happens for you, but I believe it happens. And when it shifts just in that little way, is when it's another aspect of the sacred breaking through the mundane, and people realize, oh, wait a minute, I'm experiencing something that's transcendent, and now I'm not just experiencing it, but I'm beginning to have a conversation with it. And my patient, she's still just having a conversation with trust and hope. Someday I think she's going to realize the whole picture, but there's this conversation that's starting to happen. That's what's unfolding at this stage in Mac's story in this chapter. And so I'm going to give you a minute to just, instead of reading them, you guys can look at that and just kind of start sharing about, experiences with God. I don't have them up here where I can only find them. But anyway, go ahead and start looking at those sort of things, and I'll find it here and read them out while I'm there. I can't hardly read it back there. I've got to get my bifocals up just trying. So, there they are. Have you ever had experiences with God that you initially thought couldn't be real? Reflect on Mac's anger, expectations, and experiences in the situation. Reflect on Mac's defenses. That's a lot. This is a lot. But just reflect on the things that keep us from having conversations with God when you begin to experience them. What is it that gets in the way? Once you're not just questioning God, you're beginning to kind of, okay, I'm in the presence of God. Now what do I say? How do I have the conversation? What happens? Because, and that's what Mac is struggling with. So talk about that for a minute, and then we're going to shift to one more section in chapter 6, and we'll wrap up. I'll give you like 3 minutes. Between them, Mac was uncertain what to say, and she was in no hurry to let the moment pass easily. If you couldn't take care of Missy, how can I trust you to care for me? There, he'd said it. the question had tormented him every day of the great sadness. Mac felt his face flush, angry red as he stared at what he now considered to be some odd characterization of God, and he realized his hands were knotted in fists. So we're going to move on. I mean, there's a lot to reflect on there, just in terms of those experiences. This is the other thing that I want us to end on that I love. Mac, I'm sorry. Tears begin to trail down her cheeks. I know what a great gulf this has put between us. I know you don't understand this yet, but I am especially fond of Missy and you too. Man, that's a pivotal moment. And that's a moment, whether you're going through this yourself or you're helping someone go through this, these are moments to look for. And I just love what I get to do. It's such a privilege because I had this moment with someone today. I say that a lot, but I really did have this moment with someone today where we were talking about the fact that she is beginning to be able to see God with tears in his eyes. And she can begin to communicate with that God. She can begin to have conversation with that God. And she can begin to relax into the presence of that God, not having all the answers. Doesn't have all the answers, but she can relax into that God. That's what's going on here for Mac. Mac's beginning to be able to relax into conversation with Papa. And Papa not being a big white guy helped, but also being able to see a God with tears in his eyes, hurting over the things that he hurts over. And we say that, my guess is a lot of you guys have been in church a long time, and a lot of you probably like me. I grew up in church. I've been in church my whole life. And I can say that. I can say that I know God cares about me, and I can say that I know God loves me, and I can say that, but boy, there are times that saying it, knowing it here, and feeling it here are, miles apart. And that's what's so beautiful about this transition and what's going on with Mac. And so we're going to end there, and we're going to just take a couple more of these sessions, and I think we're going to probably go into what feels natural to me, and I think this may be where Dave is going too. What feels natural to me is to jump ahead a few chapters and go, because this question starts to get really deep for Mac, and I think it does for most people, and it starts to get really deep as Mac walks into that dark cave for judgment. And that gets to be a real challenge. So if you're not there yet, go ahead and take a look at that. We'll talk about that next week. Appreciate you guys coming. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.